Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Phil Gawthorne, and with me, as always, is Mr. Liam Billingham.
The Al Powell to your John McClane, the Sam Neill to your Sean Connery and Hunt for Red October. I can't remember either of those characters' names.
Samuel L. Jackson to my Harrison Ford, but that would upset you because you would rather be Harrison Ford.
I want to be Harrison Ford when I grow up.
Because he is your biggest hero.
Harrison Ford. Today's film
is Patriot Games. It's Die Hard in a political thriller.
Phil, I've been waiting for this moment for a long
It's a big deal for you.
time.
Liam is a huge Harrison Ford guy.
And Harrison Ford's my guy.
Yeah.
It's a big guy for me. Yeah. Where do I start? This movie was on in my house all the time. This movie was so important to my dad that one time, this is a true story, I never told you this. I went to my cousin's for a sleepover, and my dad went to the video store and rented Patriot Games and said, you should probably show this movie to them.
Wow.
So I showed up. Like my dad and I were movie people. My sisters were also movie people. My mother was a little less. My cousins never watched movies. I don't even know if they had a VCR. And they were like, okay, I guess we'll watch this action movie that your dad has.
So your dad was a Patriot Games pusher. I'm into it.
He was a Tom Clancy something. I don't know, man. Yeah, it was on all the time in the house. I grew up in Boston, Irish Catholic. This was a big time in the conversation about the Troubles and all these issues, and it, you know, it's great in a way that you called it Die Hard in a political thriller, because this is, you know, we've previously had political films on this show, like Hunt for Red October, but Hunt for Red October takes place, you know, in 1984, but was made in 1989. This is kind of concurrent with the Troubles, and I think that is really exciting. So this was just a big movie in my house growing up, and the connection to the history is, like, pretty strong in my family.
It was a big deal to me when I was a kid, because what I remember about this film was it was the first time I started to appreciate filmic techniques, as in the music and some of the shots. In particular, there's the shot where there's just been the attempt on we'll get into the story, but there's been an attempt on Jack Ryan outside the Naval Academy, and the camera kind of pulls back as he realizes, like, oh my gosh, my wife and kids are in danger.
Oh, yeah.
And I started to pick up on film craft when I saw this movie. So and also it was rare growing up in the UK to see an American film set in the UK with a big star. And I have to say, I think a lot of American films that were set in Britain, they often get the cultural details like wrong or a little off. But for the most part, I would say, at least on the British side, I can't speak to the Irish side, at least on the English side, little details like the newspapers, the Independent and the Evening Standard, and the Tetley tea bags, and they got a lot of the touches right.
Tetley tea bags is a great touch.
You know, little things like that. So it was cool because it was a big Hollywood production set in you know, largely, or at least at the beginning, in the UK.
It's also interesting. This is the first film set in the UK and the US, which sort of mirrors the show in a weird way. You're British, I'm American.
Show, yeah.
Will they be able to put aside their differences from the war for independence?
I'm still a bit sore.
You're like, my favorite movie is The Patriot, but from Jason Isaacs' perspective.
It happened 200 years before I was born, so I was able to process my issues.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was 200 years.
So this film is interesting in terms of its connection to Die Hard, because this show is about tracking Die Hard's influence through films that are direct Die Hard imitators, that are the Die Hard on a Blank type movies, but also films that it has influenced in more subtle ways. So with Hunt for Red October being Die Hard director John McTiernan's next movie
follow-up to Die Hard,
this is the sequel to Hunt for Red October. Therefore, this is one of those genealogical lines branching off, if you like. So that's how I sort of wanted to frame today's conversation.
I think it's a really good point in terms of thinking about it as branching off, because I think this branches off into a wholly different style of action filmmaking than we've talked about, and one that I think has like long ramifications for the action movie genre in general. I think it's really, really important. Should I give a very quick plot synopsis of Patriot Games? We're going to explore this more in our section on the anatomy of an action movie later on. So briefly, Patriot Games takes place maybe a year or a few years after Hunt for Red October. Jack Ryan is now a academic. He's in London giving a lecture, and he stops an attempted assassination of the royal family by a man named Sean Miller, who is a hardline IRA member. In doing so, Ryan kills Sean Miller's little brother, and Miller is arrested, put on trial, and convicted of an attempted assassination of the royal family. He escapes and begins to doggedly hunt Jack Ryan and his family across the ocean into the United States. That's a kind of brief take on what the movie is. Should we talk a little bit about some top-line facts about the film Patriot Games?
Yeah. So Patriot Games was released by Paramount Pictures in the US on June the 5th, 1992, which is approximately 2 months after Hard Boiled, our last movie, received its Hong Kong release. It was directed by Philip Noyce and produced by Mace Neufeld and Robert Remy, if I'm saying that correctly, maybe not, Rehme. It stars Harrison Ford, Sean Bean, Anne Archer, Patrick Bergin, and Thora Birch. The screenplay was written by Donald Stewart and W. Peter Iliff, adapted from the 1987 bestseller by Tom Clancy, which I read.
Monster book.
It's
how many pages?
It's heavy.
Well, 450 pages.
The book, my version, it's like, actually I know exactly because I was counting them down. It was 359, but the text is so small that I feel like it was actually probably a 700-page
Just
book.
so for your reference, I'm looking at the book that Phil was reading, and it contains Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and The Sum of All Fears, the three major Jack Ryan books. Are there more Jack Ryan books?
Well, the interesting thing
The Hunt for Red October.
The Hunt for Red October. The interesting thing about the books is that Patriot Games, even though it was written after Hunt for Red October, is actually a prequel.
I did not know
Hunt
that.
for Red October. It tells, essentially it's Jack Ryan's origin story. But for the movies, they decided to make it as a sequel instead of making what the actual sequel would have been Clear and Present Danger, which was made later.
I did not know that. This movie, really quick, was made on an estimated budget of $45 million, and it grossed $178 million.
Sizable hit.
That's pretty good. And I feel like this movie was a bit of a monster. I feel like everyone, maybe I'm wrong. I think I say that about every movie. But
no,
it
was a huge hit. Yeah, right. It was a huge success. That's just the box office, the home video, and everything else. I mean,
Question for you. Maybe you've done the research. Why is Alec Baldwin not in this movie?
So, from my understanding, Alec Baldwin wanted to do A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway instead of doing the sequel. Harrison Ford dropped out of another movie at Paramount around the same time, was suddenly available. They sent the script to him. It's actually kind of an interesting story because they were already committed to Philip Noyce, who's an Australian filmmaker.
Good filmmaker.
And Harrison Ford said, I don't really know him. And they said, we made this movie Dead Calm. He said, I don't know that one. And then he said he made a movie called Newsfront. And he was like, he made Newsfront? I'm in.
What's Newsfront?
Newsfront was a movie. It was one of Philip Noyce's earlier movies, and it was about, I believe, post-World War II Australian newsmen and newsreel makers, and it was an acclaimed movie. I would have thought Dead Calm, which starred Sam Neill, one of our faves, and Nicole Kidman and Billy Zane, a great boat set.
I love that movie.
Yeah, sort of almost quasi-Hitchcockian / horror.
Nicole Kidman's film debut, I think. Isn't that her first movie?
Well, you might be forgetting about a classic movie called BMX Bandits from 1986, of which, of course, I have the T-shirt.
So we got to get you some other hobbies.
I come into the studio on a BMX.
Yeah, that's true. That when he doesn't take the sub from Glendale or the train to the Canadian mountains. All right, Die Hard DNA is the section of the show where we sort of compare this movie to the film Die Hard. Well, we do that through the whole show, so that might be a little bit wild.
But here we get specific.
Let's get specific.
Yeah. So in genealogical terms, this is really the family tree branching off. After directing Die Hard, John McTiernan made The Hunt for Red October in 1990, which started another new franchise. His third in a row. Predator, Die Hard, Hunt for Red October.
What a king, baby.
Incredible.
There should be a Last Action Hero franchise, but I don't get to make all the decisions.
So, and he originally wanted to direct the follow-up to Red October, but he wanted to do Clear and Present Danger next from a script by John Milius, which made sense because chronologically in the books that was the next story. But Paramount wanted to do a sort of origin story for Jack Ryan, and that's what this was in the book series. This was sort of the beginnings, more of a character piece. We meet the family because in the first movie, we talked about this in our episode. We meet Gates McFadden playing Kathy Ryan.
The worst
very
part
briefly.
of the movie. It's like she's a jerk.
She's mean. Yeah, she's sort of
Sally
obnoxious
exists, but she's kind of like she's barely a character. We'll get there. The casting in this movie is spot on. It's really, really strong. So, but Nick Tiernan didn't direct this. It was Philip Noyce. I really want to say Philip Noyce, who directed this film. Why didn't McTiernan direct this movie?
Well, one of the reasons, first of all, because he wanted to do Clear and Present Danger, but it was another piece of information that suggested that he didn't want to do it because of his Irish-American background, and he was a little uncomfortable with the material.
And the materials of the film.
That may or may not be true. That is out there. There is another tenuous link. James Horner did the incredible score for this movie.
Oh, I love James Horner.
And as we discussed previously, one of his unused tracks from the Alien soundtrack, Resolution and Hyperspace, is actually in Die Hard in the scene where Al Powell kills Carl. So there's a direct connection there. I think, but in terms of more like the actual story rather than the personnel, it's worth noting this film features the family man action hero, which is another departure from the pre-Die Hard action movie archetype, who are often loners. Like if you think about Rambo, Snake Plissken, the Chuck Norris movies.
Right.
This, because of Die Hard was so successful in the fact that the emotional heart of the movie was his relationship with Holly and the kids and fighting for family, I think it's worth noting that this film picked up that baton and really made it front and center. I mean, the tagline for this movie was, "Not for honor, not for country, for his wife and child."
Oh, I don't know. I remember that on the box now, but that is really, really interesting. I also think this movie plays on the Die Hard thing in that the primary antagonists in this movie are terrorists, right? I mean, Die Hard sort of started that trend, the bad guys, and sort of lampoons it at the same time with the news reporting stuff. In this case, they're politically motivated. In Die Hard, they were pretending to be politically motivated, but they're actually financially motivated. And I think that's one kind of interesting sort of connection between the two movies.
I think it is very significant because if you think about it, before Die Hard in the 1980s, I could only think of 3 examples of action films that dealt with terrorism in any way.
Which ones?
Nighthawks, the Sylvester Stallone movie where Rutger Hauer plays a terrorist, Invasion USA, and the Delta Force. But none of those films were particularly serious or particularly credible.
And in some ways not all that memorable. I just don't think about those movies that much.
They're not in the conversation particularly.
Rutger Hauer, though. Woof, what an actor.
But it's worth noting because after Die Hard, suddenly terrorists became the de rigueur antagonists. That you had Die Hard 2, of course, and then you have a plethora of them: Toy Soldiers, Under Siege, Passenger 57, True Lies, Sudden Death, Blown Away. All of these movies that suddenly Die Hard changed that and made that become the fashionable villains.
It's also fair to say that we're in the golden age of the Die Hard on a blank era right now.
It's definitely starting now. Yeah, post Toy Soldiers, it really there starts to be like 2, 3, 4, 5 a year.
Yeah, glory days, halcyon days, my friend.
Indeed, but this is probably the first American Hollywood studio movie to tackle terrorism in a more serious way and about, as you alluded to, an issue that was actually happening in the real world. That was a contemporary. There was a specific political context that this film was exploring.
Yeah, and potentially in an incendiary way. I think we talked about in the Hunt for October episode that there's this kind of ability in that movie to, first of all, Hunt for October, in a way that's similar to both this and the Clear and Present Danger, is it doesn't present the Russians or, Ramius and his team necessarily as black and white villains, right? It portrays them as complicated, and it takes place and is made in this post fall of the wall glasnost kind of era when things are changing. And so it was allowed to not be, I would say, largely propagandistic in its nature. And this movie is even more on the nose because it's taking place in real time against the backdrop of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And also, this is one of a few really strong movies that take place against the Troubles that came out around this era. I'm thinking of a movie that I think is critically underrated, which is The Devil's Own, also starring Harrison Ford and Brad Pitt. I think is a really, really strong movie. But it's really in the present tense of what's happening in the world.
Blown Away 2 years
Blown Away,
later touched on this from a slightly different angle. The Jackal touched on it a little bit. With Bruce Willis and Richard Gere playing an IRA
I love
operative.
it because it... the thesis of this show is that like we're taking these action movies as seriously as any other genre, and I really think action movies have this unique ability to reflect and comment on situations, not even necessarily politically, but like to show world conflict in a really dynamic way.
How I look at it is sort of like this, like that action movies are almost an extension of the American psyche. You know, it's almost like what's going on in the mind and in the zeitgeist,
well said.
You know, is often reflected back through these movies. You know, they're one of the most mainstream genres with a broad appeal, but America is, it has an association with a lot of these themes. It's a big part of the American psyche. Good and evil, westerns, the cowboys, we talked about how McClane is a cowboy. He's called a cowboy.
Right.
These are things that are so intrinsic, I think, to the American psyche. So it's almost inevitable that as the genre becomes more sophisticated and more prevalent, because there was more and more action films, there was a density of action films in the 90s, that they start to draw on real world events for the inspiration of the stories.
People wanted it, I think. I think that people wanted serious... Like, this is a drama as much as it's an action movie. In some ways, it's more of a drama than it is an action movie. And there... every choice I think that's made in this movie, this is a really strong movie. I actually think of the 3 Jack Ryan films, I have, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, Hunt for October. It's my least favorite in a way, but I think it's just a really, really strong movie in a whole bunch of really, really exciting ways.
I love this movie.
Yeah,
I'm really excited to talk about it. Another great piece of Die Hard DNA that was brought to my attention was that Sean Miller, the Sean Bean character, his motivation is the same as Carl's motivation in Die Hard.
Avenging the murder of his brother.
Avenging the death of his brother, which is just another interesting tidbit.
Should we talk about the anatomy of an action movie, Phil?
Let's do it.
So the anatomy of an action movie is Phil's design. It's a very, very smart way to break these movies down.
I cooked it up in my action movie lab where there's bubbling...
I spent 3 days in front of my microscope looking at individual frames of Die Hard going, what is it? There are 6 tenets. We live in a Twilight world. Of the anatomy of an action movie, of which we've decided, and I think you'll agree if you're listening to this podcast, that Die Hard gets full marks, A+, extra credit, gold star, up on the fridge, most improved student, best around. So Phil, without looking at your notes, don't look at your notes.
I don't have notes.
What's the premise?
It's all
Patriot Games.
It's all locked in.
It's all up here, baby.
No, okay, without looking at my notes. When former CIA analyst Jack Ryan... No, I'm just kidding. When former CIA analyst Jack Ryan foils an IRA terrorist attack on the royal family, the vengeful terrorists target Ryan and his family in retaliation. In order to protect his wife and daughter, Ryan returns to the CIA world and a deadly game of international cat and mouse begins.
Well said.
Totally off the top of my head.
Not written down, for sure. Definitely
nothing
not.
funny about it.
It's not funny. This is not a funny movie. It is a good movie. It's a great premise. It works well. I feel like the sort of setup is strong, and it brings the best out in the lead of this movie, who we will talk about.
We talked about how Ricochet was playing with the revenge movie, like the classic kind of revenge movie structure, and it was kind of quite playful with it. Cape Fear also had the same kind of paradigm. This is also
I literally wrote down Ricochet and Cape Fear.
Yeah, it's an interesting riff on it because, our hero intercedes in this situation that he's not really part of, and then the bad guy seeks to take revenge on him, and then Jack Ryan seeks to take revenge
Yeah.
and so on. It's a cycle of revenge, which is weirdly almost like a metaphor for the political underpinnings of this story in an
that's
odd
actually
way.
well said.
One
It's
of the
like eye for an eye makes the world go blind kind of thing, you know?
Exactly. And I think there's another part of it from a classical sort of structural standpoint that I think is interesting and worth noting that is very, very classical, which is early on in the story. It's important to note that Jack Ryan is not a CIA agent or a CIA officer. He is a CIA analyst, right?
Yes.
And he doesn't want to go back to the CIA. And his wife, Kathy Ryan, played by Ann Archer, specifically says, I can't go back to that life. And he says, I don't want to go back to it either. Now, this is the classic refusal of the call.
Right.
It's
in screenwriting parlance. The hero is called to action, and they deny. They refuse.
And this is in every Joseph Campbell, Star Wars. Do you want to go on the adventure? Call to adventure, call refused, essentially.
Yeah.
But it's roughly around the middle, I think, after the attack on.
I'll
his
tell
family.
you, I know exactly when it is. It's 37 minutes into a 2-hour movie,
There
and the
you
reason
go.
I know that is because I weirdly paused it at that moment.
When he goes back to the CIA.
Yeah, no, that's 37 minutes is when he refuses the call.
Yeah.
And about 50 minutes in, so 50 to an hour, so almost
Again, I'd
halfway
say sort
through
of
the
midpoint.
Yeah,
point of no return,
Yeah.
right? In screenwriting.
Good movie.
And screenwriting language. That was on the list. It's called The Assassin in the UK, but I actually really enjoy that movie
Bridget
based
Fonda.
on Nikita.
La Femme Nikita. I love La Femme
Couldn't
Nikita.
find a Die Hard connection, so sadly I don't think we're going to do
sorry,
it. Although
Bridget.
I do dig that movie.
Sorry, Luc Besson.
The ticking clock, I would say, is very simple. Will Ryan be able to find and take out these terrorists before they strike again?
Right. So at a certain point in the film, and I'm really curious to talk to you about the portrayal of law enforcement in this movie, but Sean Bean escapes his confinement with the help of Patrick Bergen, who's playing a character.
Kevin O'Donnell.
And at that moment, Ryan and his family are under threat again, and he's got to get them before they get away. It's kind of classic. It works really, really well. And you never sort of doubt the suspense of it. And it leads to two just absolutely amazing barnstormer sequences later in the movie that are so, so great.
And we'll talk about that in the action section. But I wanted to, I read the book.
Okay.
In the last couple of weeks.
Have you slept?
No, I am.
And neither have I, but that's for different reasons. Babies.
It's interesting in that. Okay, so Tom Clancy, clearly a literary genius of of a kind, right?
Yeah,
like one of the most successful storytellers and novelists.
What I think of him as? It's like an airport book times 10. Like, you may bring it on a plane, but you're gonna be like, wow, this is a lot longer than the flight it's gonna take to get from the UK to Los Angeles or whatever the case
exactly.
is.
And we talked about how in the Hunt for Red October episode, how Alec Baldwin said that Tom Clancy can describe a government issue pencil in 3 pages.
Yeah.
And I say that again because it's so on the money. What these books do is drown you in detail, and there's a double-edged sword to that. One, it makes for an incredibly immersive experience. On the other hand, it can be almost tedious because it's a slog to get through.
It's like Dickens.
Well, it's literally knowing, like, if I was to put this cup of coffee on this computer, would it leave a ring? Those are the kind of details that are in Tom Clancy's novels.
Well, there's a techno thriller quality to this, but I have a lot of thoughts about that too, because there's one sequence in this movie that is bone chilling in terms of its techno thriller quality that you may be able to guess what I'm talking about, but this movie is a little more successful in terms of the human stuff, the humanity of it, than I think The Hunt for Red October, for reasons that we can get into when we talk about the hero.
Yeah.
Played by.
Let's do it.
Let's
get right into it.
All right, clear the stage.
Okay.
I love Harrison Ford. He's like a second dad. He is the same age as my dad would be, which is, part of it. And I grew up watching these movies with him. And I love Han Solo. I love Indiana Jones. But there's something about this mid-career Harrison Ford that is this. It's The Devil's Own. It's, even things like Witness, which are earlier and frantic, where he's allowed to be a little bit more than the wisecracking Indiana Jones and Solo. And look, he's amazing. His arc in the Star Wars movies is the best thing about those movies, all the way up to the recent ones. But there's something about him as, like, in the hands of a lesser actor, the nerdy in a boxers and button-down shirt stuff at the beginning of this movie, the like good family man that also has to give over to a kind of homicidal rage at a certain point in the movie would be completely unbelievable in the hands of a lesser actor. And it's like, I think he's the greatest movie star of all time, but I also think he's like an amazing actor. And I love Alec Baldwin, but I think that Harrison Ford just invests this character at this time in his career when I think he's lost the need to prove anything and therefore can give a thoughtful, intelligent action hero performance. There's just nothing like it. There's nothing like what he does in this movie. There are people that did things similar, but no one will ever touch the humanity. You know, there's a scene in this movie towards the end when it's actually the last scene of the movie, and his wife says, she's on the phone. You know, they've made it through their own attempted murder several times, and he's sitting there with his daughter, and he's like making her toast, and he says, "Do you want toast or toast?" And she says, "Toast." And she's toasting bread, and his wife gets a phone call, and it's the doctor, and it's about she's pregnant with what we eventually find out will be a son. And she says, Do you want to know what the baby is? Do you want to know if it's a boy or a girl? And it's just, the anticipation, the excitement, the enthusiasm. Like, he does so much with no lines of dialogue. And the very last thing you see in the movie is Ann Archer knows that it's a boy. We don't know that until clear and present danger. And he sort of is looking at her and he wants her to answer, and his eyes kind of light up. And it's just such out of character with so many action movies and their goals. I think it's beautiful that this movie ends with the new revival of a new son. And as you said, the tagline for the movie was about his family as opposed to honor or any of these things.
It's the emotional heart.
It's the emotional,
and you never lose sight of that, and the fact that it ends with it, and it begins with it as well. I think it begins with them in the family home, and then they're on the London trip. Or it begins with them
not in the family home. It opens with this long,
yes,
beautiful credit sequence that I think is very elegant, where it sort of goes over the hills of outside of D.C., what I assume to be
Maryland,
this house that's sort of on the water, which becomes pivotal. Yeah. Sick house, by the way. I want to live there.
I'm sure this resonates with you personally as well, because you're experiencing some of these things.
Yeah, I have a daughter. She's 5. I have a son. It's dad stuff.
Yeah, I get it. I absolutely get it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little cheesy because I sometimes cynically balk at the sort of exceptional heroism of a man kind of thing. Sometimes I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. But in the hands of this actor, there's like a decency to it that makes it transcend sort of the Hollywoodness of it or any of those things. And he creates a sense of like love and duty and obligation to his family. Like no other actor can do this quite at this level. It's amazing.
I understand why this is an emotionally powerful thing, because I think, picking up from what you're saying, my take on that would be like the great movie stars. And I think Harrison Ford fits into like the tradition of people like Gary Cooper.
Yeah.
Who teach us how to be good. Who teach us values, who teach us, he is a dad-like figure. Obviously, he's a dad in the movie, but there is something about, as we look at our dads and we want them to be superheroes, in many ways they are to us. And Harrison Ford kind of brings that to life in a grandiose way. To your point about his brilliance as an actor, there was a specific story that I wanted to mention as pertains to this movie. There's a scene in it, which we'll talk about later, when they eventually track this terrorist camp, which is listed as it being in North Africa, wink, wink, and they send in the special forces to take out the suspected terrorists, and it's all experienced in CIA headquarters through satellite imagery.
Pretty rudimentary satellite imagery compared to what we're used to now. Very high tech.
Very high tech, and speaking to the techno thriller aspect. Now, the writers talked about how at the end of this scene, It's a very interesting scene because one of his CIA colleagues, the younger guy, says that is a kill, while sipping coffee and kind of gleefully getting off on what's happening, right?
Dick of the movie.
And Harrison Ford never loses his humanity in that moment and is kind of appalled and disgusted by their attitude towards what's happening.
It's deeply disturbing.
Now, at the end of that scene, there was supposed to be a longer conversation between him and Jim Greer, Admiral Greer, played by the amazing James Earl Jones, who's actually the only direct connection to Hunt for Red October, as far as I'm aware, in terms of cast and
but what a connection! He really he makes it feel like a sequel.
He's incredible.
Yeah, always.
But what's interesting is there was supposed to be a whole conversation. There was a lot of dialogue about like, well, how do you feel about, how are you doing, Jack? And I feel okay. I know that's what I'm supposed to do. And there was a whole load of dialogue. And Harrison Ford looked at the script and looked at the writers and talked about them. And he said, just put the camera on me.
Yeah.
And if you look at that scene, you see him go through the whole spectrum of complex, contradictory emotions of relief, guilt. Was this the right thing to do? All of the complex feelings that would come from going through an experience like this, where you're essentially taking a bunch of lives with the godlike omniscient power that the CIA have, which this film kind of explores. But it speaks to, we talked about this a little bit with Sean Connery, how the truly great actors bring us into their heart and soul without words.
Yeah, no, totally.
Harrison Ford is one of the true greats for that. And I think I remember in the Blade Runner documentary, Sean Young talking about how Harrison was always the great technician and had such a true, and Jack Nicholson, I think, is the same way. A lot of the great movie actors, they have a true understanding of the story. They've never become directors,
right?
But they almost are. They're a filmmaker in a way. They're a true storyteller as well as a movie star and as well as the lead actor. And Harrison Ford is, so amazing.
The precision of
the
technique.
precision, the technical, but also, he is the beating warm heart of this movie, and it is total. Like, I get why this is emotionally powerful. I think a lot of us that grew up in this time, he was like,
well, he's like the
surrogate
TV dad. He's a TV dad.
He's an extension.
You
of
mentioned it's like the American psyche. I mean, I think this is true everywhere. But like, you're kind of raised by TV. I was kind of raised by TV in some ways. Like third kid, parents working, sisters off doing their things. Like, I would gravitate towards, like, I'm going to watch Patriot Games again. I'm going to watch Clear and Present Danger, whatever it was again. And so there's this sort of surrogate father thing in this. And I also think, another interesting thing is that this will, when people hear this, it'll be a while later, but Harrison Ford's having a year right now because he's in Shrinking on Apple TV, and he has the fifth Indiana Jones film, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, coming out later this year, and he's 80 years old.
He's also in one of the Yellowstone series with Helen Mirren.
And so he's kind of, for the first time in a long time, back in the conversation.
He's kind of ubiquitous right now.
Yeah, it's so great. I mean, it's also tough to see like a hero at 80 years old and having aged and all these things, but there was an interview with him in The Hollywood Reporter where they ask him about his performance or something in Shrinking, and he goes, I don't talk about acting. I don't like to talk about acting. And he's kind of gruff and ornery, but like he's kind of a class act, right? He's not a guy who's like, fuck emotions, but he's not a guy that has to talk about it. And what's so great about the parallel you raised with that sequence when they invade the camp in North Africa, which, by the way, feels weirdly prophetic with so much of the way technology has shifted and things like. Made me think of the famous iconic war room Osama bin Laden photo. But it's all in the emotion. It's all in the face. And we were saying earlier that this film feels like, and Hunt for October a little bit, but this film doesn't even have that same kind of die-hard, wisecracking moment where Alec Baldwin does a Sean Connery impression that we talk about in The Hunt for October. This is played straight. But it's so effective because the stakes feel real, because you feel as though this could happen in many, many ways. And Ford is the perfect articulation of a guy with who's thoughtful, who's, I think, like liberal in a way, and like has, but also sort of has to work within a system that is complicated and complex, and the CIA is omnipresent and complicated and in some ways nefarious, and he's a guy caught in a really, really complex world doing the best he can. And I think men our dad's age dealt with that reality too, this post-Vietnam, what what has happened to the world kind of thing and having to exist. It's interesting that Ryan's a Marine, right? But he's not like a Marine. He's a complicated, thoughtful guy who, is reflecting on
and
his
Marines,
place in the world.
there is a whole, there's the expression like there's no such thing as an ex-Marine, and how there was an amazing video I remember seeing a few years ago where it was like flooding somewhere, and there was a bunch of Marines on a bus. I think they're all in uniform and they were going somewhere, and there were all these people stuck in the water, and they all got out and in their dress uniforms and help them, because that is the code of the Marine Corps, right? It's not just about how you are in battle, it's about how you are as a person, as a man, as a woman, or whatever, how you see the world and the values that you have and so forth. And he kind of embodies that, some of those ideals, but he doesn't rub it in your face.
He doesn't rub it in your face. And also, I would never, in a weird way, maybe I'm naive, I don't think of Harrison Ford as like an all-American guy. I think he's like a thoughtful guy with his own sort of perspective on the world, right? And I think it's just so, he feels like a real person, right? And that could be what it is. He feels like a guy who's lived in the world and has to survive and take care of his family, and also like not see things in black and white. And yet he also kicks ass when he has to kick ass. And I think you said that in the commentary track he referenced that he never has viewed Jack Ryan as an action hero.
Yeah, and that was the one last point that I wanted to make about this was, that he literally says on the documentary, I didn't see Jack Ryan as an action hero, but a regular guy. He was a family man who worked in an office. But he did have this training. In the book, it talks, and they touch on it, and I think they might do it a bit more in the Chris Pine iteration, that he was a Marine, but I think he had an accident in training in a helicopter crash. So I don't think he saw combat, and that kind of screwed up his career. And I think they touch on that a little bit in Hunt for Red October. But he is a fascinating, an iconic figure in whether he's an action hero per se or not, he is an iconic figure in action cinema.
Well, this is all just an important, he's the thoughtful action hero. And I've been for fun because I don't watch enough action movies. I've been watching like post-Taken Liam Neeson action movies right now, which I think are great. And they have a formula. They're to some extent, some of them are Die Hard on a plane. Some of them are Die Hard on a commuter train, right? But you can draw a line from Harrison Ford's Jack Ryan to every thoughtful Liam Neeson sort of like reluctant hero in those movies. And I always prefer that mournful kind of like, I have to do something I don't want to do quality to these guys, because it grounds them in the real world. Another thing that I like very, very much and think is the best thing about Nolan's Batman movies is that Bruce Wayne doesn't want to be Batman. He has to be Batman, right? And he's complicated, and it just makes for like a much richer intellectual experience than it otherwise would. And I think Ford is really pivotal to inventing that kind of action hero. Of course, you have your Gary Coopers, you have your other figures early on, but Gene Hackman and also the conversation. There's a line between these kinds of guys, and I think Harrison Ford just perfected it. It's great. And Clear and Present Danger capitalizes on a lot of the sort of like dehumanizing issues. The bad guys in Clear and Present Danger, which I think we're going to talk about at some point,
sure,
is the United States government.
Yeah.
Which I just think it goes further and further with each film.
The film, I think, is a little bit more questioning of those sorts of things than the book, although I think the film is regarded as a very, very pro-CIA, kind of pro-government movie. Mm-hmm. Should we move on to the villains?
Let's do it. Thanks for letting me unroll on my Harrison Ford. I love you, Harrison Ford. You're the best.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts. The villains.
So we've got kind of a Hydra, a triple-headed. We've got Sean Miller, played by Sean Bean. We've got Kevin O'Donnell, played by Patrick Bergin, and we've got Annette, played by Polly Walker.
She's great. They're all
Isn't
great.
she?
You know, I think Kevin O'Donnell, frankly, makes a little bit less of an impression from me in this movie, but that's because he kind of is the straight man, so to speak, among the villains. He sort of is just there to be like, Sean, let's get it going, let's make it moving. He does have that sick sequence where he kills the guys that try to kill him in his house.
I wanted to just talk about that for a second because I don't know if you picked up on this, but in that scene where Kevin O'Donnell, played by Patrick Bergin, is back in Ireland and he's pissed off the sort of they're a sort of IRA splinter group, and the main traditional IRA guys are not very happy that he's
the dude
doing
with the
this.
beard
right?
and the big,
the guy with the beard. So he meets with him in the pub and with a brigade commander or whatever he is, and then they send some guys to his house. Now, Patrick Bergin is watching a music video.
What is that?
It's Clannad's song called Harry's the
Harry's Game.
Theme from Harry's Game. Now, just to briefly, Harry's Game, which was a 1982 miniseries by Yorkshire Television, is one of my top 3 miniseries of all time, and
Wow.
the best thing I've ever seen that explores the Troubles. It's almost like The Wire for
Wow.
the Troubles in the way that it looks at. It's all about an undercover. It starts with an IRA hitman shooting a cabinet minister in front of his wife and children in London. So the British military send in a special operator to Belfast undercover to try and find the guy. But through the process, he falls in love with a woman and sort of experiences what's going on the other side. And it's very like humanistic and looks at all the complexities of it. It's also a brilliant thriller, and it was written by Gerald Seymour, who was an ex-ITN journalist, I believe. So it comes from that angle, comes from that position. It's absolutely incredible.
I've heard of it, but I don't know much about
It's
it.
amazing. But the group Clannad did the theme music for Harry's Game, and the music video of that is what he's watching in that scene.
And the opening music is by them as well, isn't it?
I'm not sure if that is like actually Clannad or James Horner kind of channeling Clannad.
That mournful Irish voice thing gets me every single time.
It's very powerful,
Yeah.
very, very evocative. The music is such a huge part of, I think, why this movie works. It almost speaks to ancient Irish ghosts and, So the villains, what do we think about these?
I think the movie in some way, after my long Harrison Ford diatribe, I think in some ways this movie belongs to Sean Bean. I think we were texting about this probably last night. It's pretty amazing that despite the fact that he tries to kill a child multiple times in this movie, it's not that you're sympathetic to him, but that there's the ability to go like, this is a guy who's like a little lost, whose ideology has gotten in the way of his like morality, and you can sort of view him as a sad, impetuous boy, as opposed to like a fully indoctrinated villain. I think that gives this movie the tragic dimension to explore a tragic subject in a really important and powerful way.
Well, it's interesting because in a weird way, if you sort of go through the looking glass of this movie and look at it from his perspective, he's essentially, he only cares about revenge on Jack Ryan and his family because of what's happened to his brother. Right. So it's the same thing that is driving Jack Ryan, not for honor, not for country, for his wife and child, for family, for blood, essentially, is also driving Sean Bean. He no longer cares about the political cause or anything like that. It's completely a personal vendetta. And really, you could say in some ways the real quote unquote villain is Kevin O'Donnell, who has sort of groomed him and
that's well said. Yeah, indoctrinated
him and sort of controls him and puppeteers him like a dog almost, like directs him as he needs to for his machinations.
But then what's interesting is if you think about it as Sean Bean's movie, then he escapes that at the end when he kills Kevin O'Donnell.
Right.
And he kills Polly.
Yeah.
Annette, Polly Walker in
Yeah.
the film. He sort of escapes the ideological underpinnings of what he's supposed to do, right? He doesn't feel that connected to the IRA, as it were. He feels connected to his brother. And that's tragic. That's sad.
It's interesting as well that the sequence towards the end, which we talk about in the action section, where he's become. I really like the bit where Kevin O'Donnell says to him, like, Sean, cool it. Like, we're here for, a political purpose, which is
Right.
actually to kidnap the royal.
Right.
Is their intention. But Sean Bean is just completely, if we look at him as like an attack dog, he controlled by Kevin O'Donnell, he's off the chain at that
Yeah.
point. He's off the leash. I personally think it's a great performance by Sean Bean.
Sean Bean is such a good actor.
I mean, I don't think he's ever done a bad performance. He's always. There's just, I don't know, there's something earthy and grounded and real and authentic about him. I think they're all really good.
They are really good.
I
It's
really
nuanced.
like the Annette character, and there was actually some origins of that. There was a similar incident where someone that was like an English woman who was quite, from aristocracy or something, I can't remember exactly, but was drawn into this world. She is a really interesting character, quite a vivid character. They're good villains. 3 interesting villains.
Well, they all feel like real people, and like you feel like they're committed to their cause, and that's really interesting. And the more that we talk about it, the more I reflect kind of on how like what's happening. Whilst you can't sympathize with people that kill children, you can sympathize with the larger tragedy that they're a part of and they're caught up in, if that makes sense. There's 2, I wouldn't call them villains, but there's another character I want to talk about in this context, which is Inspector Robert Hyland.
Yes.
Played by David Threlfall. Is that
David Threlfall, yeah.
Threlfall.
Yeah.
Who is the Irish police officer working in the UK who, or after Jack Ryan takes down Sean Miller, is sort of an antagonist towards him, right? He's present for, sort of the questioning of Ryan and is very dogmatic about Ryan not knowing too much about certain details. But also, it's a really interesting...
He's almost like a self-hating
Irishman. Yeah.
Right? And
I thought that was me.
He's a very, very good actor. He's very well known in the UK.
Yeah,
I think he was at Shameless. I think was his the British version of Shameless. But he's been around for ages. He's great. There is a thing, we talked about this a little bit with Hard Boiled, about these characters that were having some kind of inner conflict or almost at war with themselves in some way. Of course, there's the traitor character, Geoffrey Watkins, who is like the royal administrator,
great
who's like
character.
classic kind of aristocratic English character, who's actually working for the IRA as the inside person. There's a lot of stuff in here that is about identity and confusion, But yeah, he does seem kind of weirdly sympathetic to Sean Miller and kind of he's a part of the police apparatus, but he seems to kind of hate it. He does a lot with a little, I think. It's a really interesting character and performance. And he's quite actually heroic, because when they've got the bridge keeper in the scene in the escape, and they basically like, what do we do? Because they're trying to leverage them to open the door to let Sean Miller out in the van when they're transporting him to the prison. And he basically knows if we open the door, we're all going to get killed. But there's an innocent man who's just caught up in it outside, and it's a really interesting part.
It is. Well, I was going to say one of my favorite things he does in the movie is on the day of Sean Miller's transfer to probably the worst fucking prison in the universe in the UK, he brings him a coffee. Mm-hmm. And it's like a shitty cup of coffee, but he does it, right? He's so interesting. He kind of steals the scenes he's in. I referenced it before, but there's a scene where he and Alan Armstrong as Sergeant
Another
Owens.
great British actor.
A great actor. It kind of reminds me of Mr. Bean. I know that's weird, but he looks like Mr. Bean. They interrogate Harrison Ford about the shooting, and Hyland won't, Sergeant Owens is kind of good cop, and he's kind of like bitching about Miller and how, he saw his father gunned down. Very tragic. And Hyland keeps being like, he doesn't need to know all this. And he just comes alive. Like, you hit on the word self-hating Irish at the exact same time that I did, which is like, he's conflicted, he's complicated. And, it's obviously a super complicated, situation, the troubles and everything. But this movie does an amazing job of personalizing that for the people involved.
He literally says at one point, like, I can't bring myself to condemn you because I know where the hatred comes from.
Yes.
I more than understand it. So he for a character that's not really in the movie too much, he is in the book quite a lot. But he really does come to life through that performance. He really gives him dimension. Very, very interesting.
Well, and this is also what I just want to say briefly about why I love this kind of movie so much, is that it It's an action movie, but it's. I don't think this movie's particularly cathartic in its action or cathartic, and it doesn't offer solutions to an impossible question. It just kind of does the work of telling a story rather powerfully in a 2-hour period about like the toll, and not just the toll on the main American character, but the self-hating Irishman and the like, you know, the hardliner who is kind of a monster, but also has been groomed to be one, or any of these things, or the slightly like buffoonish bookseller who's like gotten in way over his head, or whatever the case was. And the interesting thing with Annette being British. She's British, right? But she's working with at one point in the film, they reference her as being British.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
English. It's English. And thank you. It's just interesting that, it takes the time to establish the ethnic and cultural identities of these characters and makes the whole thing feel tragic in a really powerful way. Boy, this is a real hoot of an episode, huh, guys?
Let's lighten things up by talking about the initial IRA attack on the royal family.
I think this sequence is exceptionally well executed. The build is really powerful. My favorite thing about this initial IRA attack is the way Ford jumps on, I think it's Sean Bean or the brother, because he does it in a way that suggests he's not an action hero. He kind of just throws his body in the air, you know? And it's almost like luck, an accident that he gets 2 shots off and manages to neutralize the guys that he does. And it all feels chaotic, not in like the glorious way that we felt in Hard Boiled, our last movie, but more in the way that like this could have gone a different way very, very quickly, and that's powerful.
Another thing that's interesting about that sequence, and we talked a little bit about why Harrison Ford is such an amazing movie star, I feel like he is capable of acting and portraying emotion while he's in the middle of an action scene.
Yes.
Right? Like the way that he runs, the expression on his face, you know, there's something about he's still able to convey complex emotions while he's in the middle of a sort of stunt-driven set piece.
Right.
You know,
because he never feels like he should be in them, which is what's so impressive. He just seems like a guy walking down the street with a shirt and pants on. And
actually, he does a lot of his own stunts, and he's very, very athletic. And you know,
he survives like 4 plane crashes.
I mean, he's kind of a Superman. You know, he's kind of like a meta-human.
Yeah, it's kind of.
But you know, in the book it mentions, like, you know, to your point, that he was trying to do a football tackle, like he was drawing on his old kind of footballs, were to strike somebody, and that's how he just wasn't expecting it. He runs at the guy from behind, kind of whacks him, you know, in the back, like probably knocks the wind out of him. The gun clatters down. But what I love about it as well is that he doesn't get away clean. He does get shot in the shoulder. It's messy. It feels very realistic
and nuanced
for the situation.
Well, it feels like Noyce is a good enough filmmaker to make you feel like he's operating on instinct. You know, there's a scene a little later in the movie where Samuel Jackson, makes a brief but great. This is pre-Pulp Fiction, right?
2 years before.
So he's kind of not. He's not like the Samuel L. Jackson that he's kind of become in a way, but he's like such a sturdy, good actor. There's a scene later in the movie where he's like, "What motivated you to do this?" And Ford says, "It just pissed me off. It was rage." And you're like, "It's totally believable. He's just furious, and he acts without thinking. Like, it's kind of a stupid thing. In a way, it's a stupid thing to do. Like, he risks his death. You know what I mean? But like, he does it, and it's so believable that then he's like, what did I do?
But you know, these things happen in real life. Like we're God forbid, these terrible type, situations, and real people have leapt to the rescue, you know? And so there is something, even though it seems like this is a sort of quote unquote action hero type moment, you know, this kind of thing does happen where people just can't abide. They can't just do nothing.
Right.
You know, and it is incredibly heroic, but it does happen. I think that's a really, we're talking about action movie terms. I think it's a great sequence, frightening, visceral, intense, very, very effective way to start the movie. What a catalyst to start the movie.
One of the things that's great about this movie is when they get that the mask off of Sean Bean, he the look on his face, like the horror at his brother's death, and how he's kind of just staring at Ryan is so it's just awful. It's awful to look at. It feels human. It feels like, wow, someone really died here. It's it's not like 10 bodies in the street. It's 1 or 2 people have died, and it's sad to look at. It's just very powerful and complicated.
But he also shoots the drivers, and so see that's pretty horrific. The way that they're they're killed, and they're just they're sort of casualties in this awful awful attack. It's just a big mess.
Yep.
Very good sequence, but then the next big one is the freeway one, right? Like that I can think of.
Well, even before that, it's the attempted taking of Harrison Ford's life by the dude on campus who looks like he's...
Well, that's the same one. Yes, that's
so
like the
Ford
same,
is
same period,
leaving whatever university he's teaching at, and there's a guy wearing like sweats who clearly is clutching a gun under his, sweatshirt or whatever, and Annette is there in a car, once again, a red-haired woman in a Jeep, which he sees earlier in the film as well, and that's what helps him piece things together. But he sort of notices this guy acting a little funny, the big dude, and he starts to walk towards, I guess, his car, his dad's station wagon. I love that that she drives a Porsche and he drives a dad's station wagon. It's like, one's a doctor,
touch.
One's a teacher.
Yep.
And he notices in the rearview mirror this guy coming, and Ford, again, communicates danger and fear, and he gets the shit kicked out of him by this guy. That's what I love about it.
He asked to do that.
Really?
Like Harrison Ford, originally I think it was more of a fair fight, or and Harrison Ford was like, I'm 50, this guy's like 22, he would beat me up.
He looks great at 50 in this.
Yeah, I mean, and you'd believe that he could beat that guy up, who, by the way, I think is a dead ringer for Jared Goff, the Detroit Lions quarterback, who used to be with the Rams.
That's funny. But
he
gets, it's and then
again, it's real. The
right.
point is, it feels kind of real. A little bit messy. He throws a punch, misses the guy. He drops the gun, but then he punches Jack Ryan in the stomach. And were it not for being saved by the soldiers who are, I think it's the Naval Academy. Where
it's the Naval Academy,
right?
Of course,
in Annapolis. So Jack Ryan doesn't save the day. He would have been killed had the soldier not
No, it's like he's
clocked the
survived by the
situation.
skin of his teeth. It's
very, very real, very,
Yeah.
very realistic. I would say, within the confines of an action movie. And then we're on to this terrifying freeway chase
where Sean
sequence.
Bean in a van takes out Ann Archer, takes out Kathy Ryan and Sally in the car with an Uzi out the side of the vehicle. They
so
crash. It's
frightening
so visceral,
and upsetting, and there is a period in that. I was watching it with with my wife a few days ago, and she was like looking at me like, "What are you going to make me watch here?"
Yeah.
She was very, very worried
painful.
about what was going to happen to Sally and Kathy in that scene, and that kind of just goes to show like how effective it is. That this feels like, oh my gosh, they could die in this scene.
You think they do die almost?
Yeah, you do, and you, my gosh, you see them on
Gurneys.
being wheeled out, in the helicopter, and they're covered in blood, and it doesn't pull punches, because it is showing you these are the consequences of terrorist violence, of violence in general. It really doesn't shy away from showing you like this is what it looks like. It's ugly and it's horrible.
The hardest part of the movie to watch is the scene where Kathy wakes up and she's "Where's Sally?" And he and Ford, Jack Ryan says she's in rough shape. They had to remove her spleen. You're like, oh.
Every time it gets me.
Yeah, it's murder. Well, because Ford and they're both incredible in it. They're both so good because it's like again, it's about family. It's not about like action or whatever. And so you feel the real world consequences of this. This is not an action scene, but to change the mood a little bit, there's a scene that comes before the finale at the Ryan house and the sort of boat sequence that is the most action movie-esque part of the movie. But there's a scene where Ford goes to an Irish bar and confronts Richard Harris, who's playing
Paddy O'Neill,
who's sort of a Sinn Féin representative, right? Sort of the political side of the organization who goes on TV and goes, none of us wanted this to happen, and like there's a question of if he knows what happens or not. Like, he's a complicated figure. But they go into the bar, and Ford is like, "Where's Sean Miller?" And he's like, "I'm not going to tell you anything." And Ford says, "I will fucking destroy you." And it's like, it's basically an action sequence because it is so visceral and real. And it's that thing that, like he says earlier, it was rage. I was pissed off. I was angry that this happened. And I don't think of it as an action sequence, but it gets your blood boiling because he's angry. And Ford doesn't do that often in movies. He's much more known as the kind of like, in Indiana Jones as like,
the lovable rogue almost,
or whatever
but
it is.
This is when he channels his righteous indignation, as he does in this and like Air Force One, for example. But
Get
I'd say
off my plane.
in some ways more effectively in this because this is a more realistic movie.
Air Force One's was weird in that regard. It's almost a third Jack Ryan movie, but not quite.
But sort of not as grounded. No,
Yes, I agree.
no pun intended.
Enjoy it. Whoa.
But that finale, I think, is an absolute banger. And I remember distinctly, this was the first time I had seen night vision in a movie, the night vision technology. Now,
The Rock.
It had appeared in Silence of the Lambs, but I hadn't seen it at that time. And it's actually in Living Daylights. But this was the first time I'd ever seen it used. And I remember the combination of the music and the suits they're wearing as well when the bad guys go in are it's almost like Lawnmower Man, actually. They're kind of like these
Did
grey,
that feel like they were
slick,
too well equipped?
I mean, that's an expensive operation, but they do seem to have a lot of, a lot of money.
They're
well financed.
Yeah, that's true. The movie never gets into that side of it, but it is believable in the sense that there's money. They're
they're going to terrorist camps and training,
Right.
and there's clearly like money that's supporting their endeavors. But that finale, I think, is so suspenseful. Basically, what's happening is Jack Ryan is going to get an award by the Royals
family
who he saved, who I believe is this Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is technically what he is, and he's like the Queen Mother's cousin. What happens in the finale is Jack Ryan is at his home
celebrating Sally's return from the hospital after being in the hospital for what feels
and I
like
love
months.
that detail that he's like he can't change that appointment when the Royals say they wanted to try and meet up with him. He's like, he has an appointment he can't change. He won't prioritize meeting the royal family over his daughter.
So he
that
just
says
invites
a lot.
them.
So he invites them, and they say, why not? So James Fox as Lord William Holmes, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and some of his entourage go to the Ryan household, and that's when the bad guys strike.
And it's a great build-up because there's a member of the royal family there, and also Ryan's life has been in danger. There's like a whole bunch of cops, Maryland State Police, people outside, and they all get quietly killed by Miller and his gang. And it starts to dawn. So great. Talk about a McClane detective kind of moment. The power goes out, and he looks outside, and he goes, the lights in the boathouse are still on, which is like chilling because it's like, why would the lights be on in the boathouse if the power's out here? And that's when he knows. And that and the lack of response on the radio, the walkies, makes him go, something else is going on here. And then Miller and his group enter the building, and it's a cat and mouse.
Cat and mouse, and Samuel L. Jackson's there as Robbie, and he's part of it and part of the fight back. I think it's just a fantastic scene. It's so suspenseful. It's so gripping. The sound and the lack thereof, and the storm. It's just really, really.
You know what's
atmospheric.
amazing about it is that there's two things. One, barely a sound, and barely a shot fired. And that's what makes it really, really powerful, is that barely does... I mean, there's a shotgun that gets just used as a blunt objects as opposed to like an actual gun. Like, it's really sort of cat and mousey quiet as opposed to like an outright shootout, which I think really, really makes it really strong. Miller fires a couple times, but it's almost at the end in desperation.
And the guns are silenced as well, I think. Yeah. They just fire when they get on the boat. And then, of course, this leads to them a boat chase between Ryan and... Ryan actually gets in a boat to as a trick to... he pull them away from pull the bad guys away from the Royals who are hiding in the rocks, and then so they're being pursued by O'Donnell and Annette and Sean Miller. But then when I don't know what you would call that on a boat. You're from Massachusetts. You must know what that's
I don't
called.
know what that's called. I don't go on boats.
You don't. I thought you were just like the Kennedys over there. Just like
my parents wish. I don't know if they do. That's sort of top of the boat. I don't know.
It comes off, but it reveals the fact that Ryan is on his own, and therefore it's a sort of decoy run. So that's when O'Donnell and Annette are like, no, we have to go back because they're actually trying to kidnap Lord Holmes to leverage him. So the interesting thing about this boat chase was the end of that sequence, which is a really pretty exhilarating, exciting sequence, is it was a reshoot. So
what?
The original ending ended with Miller and Jack Ryan. They ended up on like some rocks fighting to the death, and they fought underwater, and there was a shot, sort of a wide shot, where you see one figure rise up and one go down. And the idea was almost that when that was described, it was reminding me of the end of Drive, where you see the shadows and you're not sure who survived that fight.
Oh, right.
So it sounded amazing, but the producer was saying, Mason Neufeld was saying basically it was like very, very pretty and very, very boring. It just didn't have the punch that they
those
needed.
Boats are flying. They look like they're flying.
Their idea was, why don't we make it a Western type thing where the boats are, I guess, like two stagecoaches or two horses, if you know, whatever you want to say, that are, propulsively going through the waters, and then Sean Miller jumps from one to the other.
It's ironic he jumps to the one that's on fire, which tells you what a suicide mission this is.
That bit is it's so crazy. It's so like, so exciting, that bit. And then, so the ending with they fight to the death on the boat. That was all a reshoot. The bit where they fight on the boat, and then it ends with, spoiler alert.
Pause the podcast if you haven't seen Patriot Games yet.
Sort it out.
Yeah, that's crazy.
With Sean Miller falling onto the anchor.
Right.
After this really visceral scrap to the death. So a lot of that actually,
most action movie actiony part of the movie.
And that took. In fact, I think it was Roger Ebert said that he thought that was like he was expecting something more cerebral after Hunt for Red October, and he described that ending as, I wasn't expecting the Indiana Jones ending.
Which in a way is fair, but also I think that they wanted the suspense to build to something in the movie.
The movie needed it. This is a feud, right, between these two characters.
Yeah, that's true.
It's kind of
a blood. It's
a blood feud, and the audience craves. You have to be in tune with what's the audience emotional experience of the movie. What do they want? What are they craving?
Yeah.
If you lose sight of that at your peril, I would say. And obviously, that's sort of commodified through the testing process, and that the original ending tested badly. But I think it's cost them a lot of money to redo that. But
I bet.
But it was worth it because because of that. It was partly because of that. Then the film was completed, the story works, and the film's a big hit. So. A bunch of great action sequences, but kind of different from the ones that we're typically describing, because they're more visceral and more somewhat grounded or realistic.
I mean, it just works. It's suspenseful. It's scary. There's a really, very quickly before we jump onto our final tenant, the way they go in and out of the basement time and time again is just so smart. Like, it uses the house really logically. Philip Noyce is a really good craftsman and really good at doing action. And I think the film he follows this up with, Clear and Present Danger, is some absolutely harrowing action, and in some ways is a even better movie.
I think he's a great director. He's a really muscular director, but also sensitive and nuanced at the same time.
Yeah.
Gets all the little details right, gets all the little touches right. Just on that point, one thing I noticed watching it again, in the opening sequence, in terms of like these little nuances that you don't necessarily notice, when Jack Ryan is running towards his wife and child, saying like, get down, when he realizes there's a bomb going to go off, and Archer turns her back to where the explosion is to shield Thora Birch.
Sally, yeah.
And then Jack Ryan comes and like shields both of them. But that little detail, like things like that are like, that gets me. You know? Like, because that's what you do as a parent. You're like,
You sort of strike your... And also, that's a quick moment to say that Anne Archer as Kathy Ryan is so good in this movie. Such like a fully realized character. Like, she and Ford have such good chemistry. And the family stuff, I think... doesn't quite it sort of informs the humor, because I view this movie less as like humor and like a haha sense, but like the human comedy, or like the idea of a family. They're playing Monopoly late at night on vacation. They're, he's like, do you want toast or toast? Like real, actual, feels lived in human kind of dynamics. Ford's a geek. He's like a dad. He's in his boxers and a button-down shirt, and she shows up like looking beautiful, and he's like, like the humor comes from being humans, from like being regular people.
He's not afraid to make himself look a little
nerdy,
silly or goofy or whatnot. But of course he never can, because he's Harrison Ford.
Ford.
He's the most handsome guy that's ever lived.
He feels full of sort of he's just a human guy, right? Like his foibles. He's a real guy. He's a nerdy dad. You can roll your eyes at him. He doesn't make dad jokes, because that wouldn't befit Harrison Ford either. But he's just the humor is he's charming. He's adorable.
There isn't a ton of humor in the movie, but you're right. It does come from that side of it, the family, just the normal, real, textured family life, and Thora Birch as Sally, the quirky things that she says, and she's
a cute kid, but not annoying.
Yes, she's sort of
precocious, but
without being annoying, which is quite a difficult line to walk.
I think James Earl Jones is just kind of has the delivery, this deadpan ability to be funny that really works a few times in the movie. Yeah, it's definitely not a funny movie. It doesn't have the space to be funny.
It's
and
not a
it
funny
shouldn't
subject.
be. No, it's not a funny subject
it's
at
not
all.
a funny movie, which is fine.
It's a good movie, though.
It's a hell of a good movie.
Hell of a good
Hell of a
movie.
good action thriller.
More action movies deserve awards, deserve Oscars. So that's why we invented the Die Hard Oscars, a.k.a. the Action Movie Awards. So give us a second. We just got to put our tuxedos on.
Get the hairspray, get the
Quick
nasty
thing,
cologne going.
since often at award ceremonies, there's alcohol. Didn't this movie make you kind of want to go to like an Irish pub or an English pub? Like,
Oh,
didn't you-
totally, yeah.
like kind of. It's just I miss that.
Well, it's
Sometimes-
interesting thing, we talked with Hard Boiled, it was a tequila slammer. This is a pint of Guinness, kind of situation. Each movie
delicious.
should have a drink.
I
in-
like a Guinness a lot. I don't know if it's my favorite beer, but I do like a Guinness every once in a while. The John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. Phil, the nominees are...
Well, I've got four. I've got four here.
Okay.
There was one that was the most quippy, because this is, as we say, this is a serious film, so there are sort of glib one-liners that you might get in other action movies.
Yeah.
But there was one where when Annette is doing her honey trap on the IRA brigade commander, and he says, "Oh, you're not going to make me wear a rubber, are you? The church says wearing one of them's a sin, darling." And then she pulls out the gun and says, "So's this, darling."
And she blows his
Shoots
head off.
him twice. And
That guy
That was
sucks.
a zinger.
That guy sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, he deserves it. Taking his wedding ring off. Gross. Okay.
Another one that was a bit more sort of chilling, but I just thought that the turn of phrase where I thought was very powerful when Admiral Greer, James Earl Jones says, when they're debating whether or not they're not sure if it's the right camp to go in, and he says, SAS could take on any one of these camps in under 2 minutes, kill everybody there, and be gone before the echo fades. Are you sure this is the same woman? I found that's like spine chilling.
Spine chilling.
But I like that it speaks to this thing of like questioning that omniscient power of the CIA, the godlike power to just snuff out lives. It doesn't look at it as a complete. There is a little bit of celebration of it, and in the context of what's happening for the story, you want the power of the CIA to protect your family. But there is what I think is nuanced about it is there is that slight moral questioning of this is a very powerful tool that we're wielding here, and that we have a lot of power. Is that a good thing or not? So I thought that was a really great line. And to be fair to Clancy, that was actually in the book.
Oh, that's cool.
But the last one, and my vote would go to, when they're in this period of the film where they're debating whether or not to do the raid, Admiral Greer says to Jack, like, "Excuse me, tell me one thing in life that is absolutely for certain," to which he responds, "My daughter's love." And to me, that's what, he sells it better than I can because he's Harrison Ford.
Did Harrison Ford just enter your body?
I can't do a Harrison Ford.
Well, there's only a couple things you can do with that.
It's theme stated, right?
Yeah.
Again, in screenwriting parlance, that's the heart of the story. That's what this is about. It's about his daughter's love, a love of family. So for me, that gets my vote, even though it's like kind of a sentimental line. Powerful.
I think that's a good choice. I'm a big fan of I Will Fucking Destroy You, but I want to just pull back a reference to something that I think we've discovered in the course of this conversation, which is Robert Hyland's line about, like, I can't quite bring myself to condemn you because I understand where you're coming from. I just think speaks to the nuance and complexity of this whole thing and just gives it a tragic dimension, right? So that would be my pick, but I like your pick too. I also just think I will make it my mission in life. He's just amazing.
The way he says that.
Incredible.
It's also it's not just the line itself, but it's the delivery of the line.
He's the greatest. Hey, Harrison Ford, you're the greatest. The greatest that ever was. The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. The nominees are
Anne Archer as Kathy Ryan.
Very good.
Thora Birch as Sally Ryan. James Earl Jones as Admiral Jim Greer. And Sean Bean as Sean Miller. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, Harrison Ford steals the movie. I'm sorry, he does. No, I know we can't pick him. Who I think is really good in this movie that I don't know if deserves that, but I think is great, is J.E. Freeman as Marty Cantor.
Yes, I had him actually for the next category.
Interesting. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
He's good
excellent.
actor, gone before his time.
Yeah.
Passed away from AIDS, which I discovered.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
tragic, but great actor and sort of like a iconic. I like that guy.
He almost always plays a prick
or
in the best possible
way.
way.
He's really good.
Miller's Crossing, Go. He's in Alien Resurrection as well.
Oh, right, he is in that.
This, I think, is one of the best performances.
He's great.
He's just so convincing as like a hardened
Government functionary,
CIA, prick.
I think another potential person on that list could be Polly Walker as Annette. I think she's very, very strong. Look, this is a strong movie across the board, but I think on some level, and David Threffel, I think Robert Hyland is great, but I think I'm torn between Anne Archer, who I think is, previously on this podcast in Narrow Margin, who's just a great actress. We may have given it to her for Narrow Margin. I can't remember. We gave it to
Jim Sicking.
Which was deserved. Sean Bean, this is just like a taste of what's to come from him as an actor. He's so extraordinary in everything. He's so good in GoldenEye. Whenever I think of GoldenEye, I think of For England James, and then he gets shot. It's just so powerful. And he's great in Game of Thrones, and he's amazing in one of my favorite movies of all time, which I don't know if we talked about it, but I bet you can guess what it is. I'll give you a clue. I'll give you a line from it. You ever kill anybody? Ronan.
Oh, yes, of course. What
What
colour is the boathouse at Hereford?
What
colour is the boathouse at Hereford?
I ambushed you with a fucking coffee cup.
Amazing,
That's amazing. I think this is a tough one. I got to give it to Anne Archer.
I agree.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, she's amazing.
I love the fact that, in a lot of these action movies, we talked about the fact that, typically the role of the quote unquote wife is this. Well, I don't want to get the phone call at 3 a.m. that you've been killed. Like bland, vanilla, whiny, dull.
A little bit of
right?
some of Adrian in the Rocky movies when they don't take
just
the time
a drip,
to really,
because it's not their fault because the characters are underdeveloped. This character is a top eye surgeon at Johns Hopkins, right?
Yeah.
Drives a Porsche.
What a baller.
It was total badass. And then she has that great moment when you mentioned earlier, when she can't find the shells for the shotgun, but uses the butt of it to smack
Polly in the
Annette
in the face.
I think I just think it's important that the female lead is actually a dimensional character who is like, to the Die Hard thing, we talked about how Bonnie Bedelia as Holly McClane is doing better.
Yeah.
She's doing better in her job than John McClane.
That's an interesting parallel.
And so is she.
Yeah, that's not an issue for him. He's not like a dinosaur,
so,
whatever.
Times are sort of changing around that issue, and I think that's worth tracking. I think she's just got so many... For a character... I mean, Philip Neusser mentioned this, that the tricky thing for her playing this role is that she's a reactive character. Things happen to her. She doesn't drive the action forward. Yet, in spite of that, you love her. You love her in this character.
She also makes a brilliant choice earlier on in the film when she's like, "Did they ask you to go back to CIA?" And he says, "I said no, honey." And she says, and this line from a lesser actress from a lesser well-directed movie, "I can't go back to that life." But from her, it's like, "I can't go back to that life."
It's very honest.
It's very honest.
Yeah,
and clear.
underplayed.
And also, don't fuck around. And then he does go back to the life, which I found a little complicated in terms of the movie. But of course, he has to. It's a natural plan. So yeah, Anne Archer 100 times. But this to ignore. There's just a lot of really good actors.
There's one thing I wanted to, for my honorable mention. They're all great, but. James Earl Jones as Admiral Jim Greer. What Philip Noyce said about him I thought was wonderful. He said, "He is possibly the greatest actor I've ever worked with. He's a fine violin and a fine violin player. By that I mean he understands and plays the instrument that are his body and voice just so well." I think people lose sight of James Earl Jones because of Darth Vader. They just think of Darth Vader, but what a incredible actor and an important figure. He's wonderful. And he kind of goes on a cool arc through these three movies of Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, and Clear and Present Danger, where he has a lot of heavy lifting as
He's
an actor.
Amazing in Clear and Present Danger.
Yes, very, very powerful.
I can't wait to talk about that movie.
Yeah.
I actually rewatched it the day my son was born.
Yeah.
It was wild. It was like on my phone in the hospital. My wife was like, "I'm having the baby." I was like, "Hang on, this part's good."
Yeah, exactly.
Just chill out. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. I just wanted to pause and say that I'm doing a good job of saying Thornburg. Finally.
Yeah.
The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. Nominees are
Jeffrey Watkins, played by Hugh Fraser, the traitor insider at the Royals.
It's never clarified why he's betraying them.
He doesn't really. He doesn't have a clear motivation.
And he's also
he's explained.
He's British, right? He's English, so it's not like it's like a cultural or like he's actually Irish.
He doesn't have, to your point about David Threlfall's character, he doesn't have any. It would have been nice maybe to have some of that, but there probably just wasn't the real estate to get into it. He was just he's just a traitor.
It might be different if it's a different actor. I don't know, like if it's been maybe an Irish actor or something, where they don't even have to say it, but it's implied in the character or something like that.
Tricky because you don't want to give away the twist. And you don't really think too much about him because he seems very at home in that world of the Royals. But anyway, he's
a dick, though.
He is a dick. Marty Cantor, played by the great J.E. Freeman, as Jack's belligerent and obstructive CIA colleague. And the electrician, played by Tom Watt, in the scene in the rare bookshop when they realize
hello, it's like very caricatured.
Exactly, it was he's walked straight off Windsor Flight 114 from Die Hard 2.
Hello,
his seat was next to the Artful Dodger.
He's like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins.
He's just the one caricature in the whole movie because, as I say, I felt that most of the British stuff they got the details right.
He's ridiculous,
but he's just so exaggerated.
Well, I'm curious.
Although he's funny in the scene, actually.
But it's kind of like, look, this is a working class British person. Like, it's a little ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And
so
I don't know.
I put him on
Philip
the list.
Noyce maybe spent a little more time casting. I don't know what happened there. But, it's that guy's credit. He's memorable. Do you have anybody else?
Those are my three.
Oh, you missed the best. Well, first of all, the bookseller's the dick. But the guy who says, that's a kill moment while he's sipping his coffee, he's the dick of the movie.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know who that actor is, and no disrespect, that guy sucks. And it's pretty amazing that in a single line, you're like, that guy is the biggest piece of shit in the entire world. He's awful. He's like some idiot that went to Stanford and works for a think tank, and is soon like, like, it's just, and Ford, he's almost an extension of Greer in Clear and Present Danger, like the government functionary who's only in it for themselves and is just like it's sort of forecast.
You mean Ritter?
Ritter, not Greer. Sorry, yeah. He kind of like forecasts the Ritter character in Clear and Present Danger as this like shitty, morally
I bet they went to
bankrupt.
college together, actually.
Yeah,
those
they
two
definitely.
guys.
Henry Czerny,
the best. He's the best.
Yeah, he's the dick of the movie. Best death.
Fair. Best death. Kind of a weird one to be glib about, but this is just a movie. I've got Hitman Ned and Jared Goff look-alike being killed by the security forces outside the Naval Academy.
Hitman Ned.
Sean killing Jeffrey Watkins, I thought was quite effective. By accident when he just kind of goes in guns blazing and
what
kills
a lunatic. He's
kills
really
their
off,
own man.
Yeah.
Jimmy Reardon being killed by a net. With a double tap to the head, very professional. And Sean Miller being thrown onto the anchor by Jack Ryan.
In some ways, it almost has to be Sean Bean throwing onto the anchor, but I do think the killing of what's his name, Reardon by Net is great because it's sort of the one kind of like quippy action movie line in the movie. I think that like from
he thought he was in for a very different night.
If the movie was from his point of view, it would be a very different thing. Good. I think it's got to be Sean Bean, though, because it's the catharsis and, it's an extension. And this isn't a movie of glib kills.
And also Sean Bean gets blown up shortly after, because he's probably still alive, actually. And then it gets blown up when the flaming boat hits the rock, so he sort of gets double bubble. It's
good game for
satisfying,
Nintendo.
It's a satisfying
Double
death.
bubble?
Double Jeopardy!
Ooh, let's take off the suits and put on the lab coats? I don't know where I'm going with this.
Now, I like to make these quiz questions as convoluted as possible.
Yeah, I know, I do know. But at least you do it in that beautiful voice. I actually have a quiz question for you.
Oh, cool. All right,
but
so you can get your own back. All right.
Yeah.
All right, question number one.
It's easy.
Question number one. In 1991,
oh my God,
John McTiernan executive produced a TV movie starring Patrick Bergin in the title role as a medieval outlaw. Which legendary English folk hero did Bergin play? And there is a clue. You can phone a friend.
I need to phone a friend.
You can phone a friend.
I feel like it's close.
Another major film was released the exact same year about the exact same character, with Alan Rickman playing the villain opposite Kevin Costner.
The theatrical movie is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I imagine the title of the made-for-TV movie starring Patrick Bergin is Robin Hood?
Correct. The
I've never seen
1991
that.
British adventure film.
Is it good?
I've never seen it. Uma Thurman is in it, Jürgen Prochnow, Jeroen Krabbe, and Edward Fox.
Wow, Jürgen Prochnow and Jeroen Krabbe are in a movie together?
It was supposed to be a theatrical release, but it ended up premiering on television.
I like Robin Hood stories.
I really like Patrick Bergin, actually. I think he's great. And he'd done the Julia Roberts...
Sleeping with the Enemy.
Yeah, so he was kind of having a moment, as they say, around that time.
Sleeping with the Enemy was a big movie in my house with my parents would put on with my sisters after I went to bed. They let me watch Patriot Games, but they're like, I don't know, Julia Roberts is in the tub in this one. Maybe something else. All right, I got one. Two more.
Okay. Question number 2. Which member of the Patriot Games cast played the role of Zeus Carver in one of the Die Hard sequels?
Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, I knew you'd get that.
Come on.
Sometimes I like to just throw you a gimme.
I love Samuel L. Jackson in Die Hard with a Vengeance. He's so good in that movie. Anyway.
Great movie.
Yeah.
All right, and for our ultimate convoluted corner.
Welcome to Convoluted Corner with your host, Phil Gawthorne.
Question number 3. Ellen Geer, who plays Jack Ryan's CIA colleague Rose in this movie. Remember her? Mm-hmm. She also appeared in the 1983 film Heart on a Wheel. Bruce Willis was a big fan of that film and handpicked the star of it for a key role in Die Hard. Can you guess that star?
Is it Ellis? Can I have a clue?
You can. This actress appeared in 2 of the biggest box office hits of 1990, one of which was Die Hard 2. The other was a courtroom drama we've discussed several times on this podcast that also starred Harrison Ford.
Oh, yeah. It's Bonnie Bedelia.
Yay!
Yeah, Presumed Innocent is a good movie.
Yeah.
Oh, Harrison Ford.
So
all right. I'm going to attempt to do a Phil Gawthorne voice for my trivia question. What famous filmmaker's brother appears as a lowly CIA analyst in Patriot Games?
Great question. Ted Raimi is Sam Raimi's brother, and he appears as the analyst in this movie.
And he looks exactly like his brother.
Funnily enough, he's also got a little part in Hard Target.
Yep. He's in a few things in the 90s.
Yeah,
You're kind of like, there's Ted Raimi. He's also in a lot of Sam Raimi's movies as well. Sam Raimi. Love Sam Raimi.
Great filmmaker.
Great filmmaker. Great movie. I don't know what else to say. I love this movie. I think in a weird way, like, my appreciation of it has only deepened from this conversation. You know, I have a real soft spot for movies that are both exciting and visceral and great that also have the ability to engage real world events. You know, Clear and Present Danger, which follows this up, does that. I mean, you know, one of my favorite things about the Lethal Weapon movies, for example, is that they all tackle real issues, right? Lethal Weapon 1 is kind of about, it's about drugs and, you know, but it's also about like being a veteran. Lethal Weapon 2 is about apartheid. Lethal Weapon 3 is about gang violence in LA. And 4, which is admittedly kind of a ridiculous movie, is very sympathetic to the immigrants. And so I think about that a lot. I just love that, you know, Die Hard is an interesting example or film to relate to this one because it's a little at times preposterous and ridiculous. Right? I mean, that's the nature of it. It's a big action movie, but you can feel in Die Hard that people like Hans Gruber can exist. People like Carl can exist, right? The kind of things they do in the movie might not, but you can feel that kind of like greed is good Wall Street kind of vibe. It feels like a real thing. And Patriot Games, and I think Hunt for October and Clear and Present Danger are like a natural extension of this. Like, let's make a exciting movie, but let's not discount the human element and the tragedy of contemporary, at least at the time, politics.
How I would sort of frame it as well is like, you know, we have Die Hard going down this one track, and this is it branches off, and then it continues in two different tracks. Basically, you have the more sort of light-hearted, less serious Die Hard on a Blank type films, such as Sudden Death or, you know, Under Siege to some extent, and those. And then on this other track that this is branched off from Hunt for Red October, you have these serious, politically conscious techno thrillers that are more grounded in real world events, grounded in real world politics, and slightly more intelligent and realistic in their approach. And these two tracks run parallel throughout the 90s.
You know, you mentioned The Rock, which is in some ways a preposterous movie, but in other ways is maybe my favorite Michael Bay movie because Ed Harris's character is so justified and it's rooted in what happened in the Iraq War, and it's great in that sense. It's powerful.
Yeah, in some ways, that film has elements of both, although it's a bit more. It's less of a serious film, but that doesn't have to be a pejorative statement. To me, The Rock is arguably, you know, without question for me in the top 3 action films ever made.
It's good.
But Patriot Games.
Yeah, but we're talking about Patriot Games. Phil.
I love this movie. I think it's fantastic. Harrison Ford's incredible in it. It was the birth of this iconic, or the rebirth of this iconic character, and he is amazing.
Well, and I just also think that like this is going to be a big year for Ford. He's aging. I think there's going to be some big reconsiderations of his contribution to movies, and lost in that, I think, really is the sort of mid-tier Ford movie. Not even mid-tier, but mid-period, and like non-Indiana Jones, non-Indiana Jones, non-Han Solo kind of projects like The Mosquito Coast, Witness, Jack Ryan, Devil's Own, like these kind of parts where he got to be a regular guy who didn't have to be an action hero, and how soulful he could be. I was talking about, my wife was talking about that Hollywood Reporter piece, and she was like, he's never won an Academy Award. And I was like, yeah, but he's bigger than that. I mean, that'd be great if Harrison Ford won an Academy Award, that would be great. But he's created something much bigger than an award. He's created like a kind of iconic American. He is Gary Cooper. He's a new Gary Cooper. He's contributed that much to adult action or adult drama thrillers throughout his career. He's just amazing.
My favorite probably of that era was Witness, for which he was Oscar nominated.
Great movie.
I love that movie.
Great movie. Well, it's interesting you referenced also that he was a big fan of an Australian film because he worked with Peter Weir.
Yeah.
I think a few times. Yeah, Mosquito Coast and
Mosquito
Witness.
Coast as well. Yeah.
And also just, we've been going for a while. Great taste in what he does and what he chooses to work on. So, Harrison Ford, you're the best.
All right.
Hey, listen. Are you subscribed to the show? Have you rated the show? Have you reviewed the show? Do all of those things if you haven't. Tell a friend. If you have a friend that likes action movies, that likes Patriot Games, they're the person to tell about this show. Please do that. And also, you can find us on Twitter. Phil, where are you on Twitter? Where are you at with Twitter these days? You on there?
I'm there.
You check in? See what's going on? Should we at you? How do we at you?
Yeah, you can at me, at Philip Gawthorne. Please do. I'm shouting into the void out there.
Yeah,
so
he is.
Help me out.
So much. Just a lot of tweets about Hardboiled. Yep. I'm at Liam G. Billingham. The show is on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB, and you can email us at diehardoab@gmail.com. Next time on the show, Casey Ryback cutting dudes up with his kitchen knives.
Because we're going under siege, baby.
Welcome to the revolution. Thanks,
Cannot
everybody.
wait.
I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm Phil Gawthorne.
And we'll be back next time with some new FBI guys, I guess. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Please rate, review, subscribe, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu and the whole team at Sugar 23. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.